Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. First of all, I want to apologize for not being with you on Friday. We had a technical glitch with the internet, but we're back, and hopefully that won't happen again. But I do want to thank Lynn Sloan and Lope Yap, who put me on the right path and got us up and running again. So thank you. I want to speak this morning about several different things. The first thing we want to address is the Supreme Court of the United States. Today, there will be a hearing dealing with presidential power. Does a president have the power to fire at will people who have been hired and who, according to the law, can only be fired by Congress, not by the President of the United States, not unilaterally? And so the unitary presidency is now in the hands of the Supreme Court. And let me be clear. I do not believe that a president of the United States should have the power to fire at will. And we've seen that now on several different occasions. But the arguments which will be made this morning, which I will be listening to all ears, will determine what the Supreme Court will do in terms of expanding the power of a president of the United States. Let's be absolutely 100% upfront. The president and his people believe in a unitary presidency. They believe that a president should have the power to do whatever needs to be done, with or without the consent of Congress. And that includes firing people, including civil service employees. And let me remind you, the civil service laws have been a part of our fabric since the 19th century. Now, the Supreme Court is clearly divided. There are two justices, and you know their names, Thomas and Alito, who will most assuredly vote with whatever the president believes. There are three justices, liberals, who will oppose this action, and the rest, they're up in the air. It boils down to two justices, in my mind, the Chief Justice, John Roberts, and an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court put on the bench by Donald Trump. Will she exercise the independence necessary? Amy Coney Barrett, the eyes of the nation are on you. Now, I want to address another facet. You will recall on January 20th last, when the President of the United States took office, he issued an executive order dealing with a very serious question. That is birthright citizenship. I turn now to the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. I could go on, but I want to be clear about this. If the conservative members of the court are strict constructionists, if they are originalists, if they believe completely that the wording of the Constitution should be observed, then let's be clear. There is no question the 14th Amendment will be upheld. But one other thing will happen with all of this, and that is a president's executive order will now be subject to challenge. The fact that a president says it does not necessarily mean, even if he signs an executive order, that will be the law. And that, to me, is what's important. So I believe very strongly that birthright citizenship is established in the Constitution. If there is to be a change, let it be a constitutional amendment. You know, we've done that before. When we passed the Prohibition Amendment, we then turned around and repealed it, the only time in the history of our country that an amendment to the Constitution has been repealed. But if those who really want to see that change are willing to go to the mat, let them take this to the states and let there be a real consideration. I believe this is an important move. There is something else which we need to understand, and that is that the Supreme Court will be rendering decisions in the coming weeks which will have a huge impact on the future of our country. I have said this before, and I want to say it again. The whole purpose of the founders was to create a balance of power by giving co-equal branches of government the opportunity to be involved. There was not supposed to be one superior branch. That was one of the arguments between Jefferson and Hamilton, and the compromise achieved by James Madison preserved what we now have as co-equal branches of government in order to preserve a balance of power. So that is my concern on one hand. But there is another concern that I have. Last night I watched 60 Minutes. I watched Marjorie Taylor Greene, or as Donald Trump refers to her, Marjorie Traitor Greene, explain her opposition to what the president has done in terms of, well, his attacks on her and what she views as an attack on our country. Remember, Marjorie Taylor Greene was the most loyal servant of the president. And then she flipped. She flipped over the question of the Epstein files, which within the next 2 weeks we will no doubt be reading. And that, my friends, will also be revolutionary. Donald Trump has opposed it with every fiber of his being, although only when the Republicans in Congress finally stood up and rebelled did Donald Trump respond. This is a serious matter. And although I don't like the positions of Marjorie Taylor Greene on many issues, and last night on 60 Minutes, she went out of her way to bash Israel, I want everyone to understand that her concerns about Donald Trump are valid in my mind. But there is yet another issue, an issue of international importance, which we must address, and that is Ukraine. There are serious attacks being made on Ukraine by Russia. Vladimir Putin is winning on the ground. He sees no reason to compromise. And last week, we heard him say very clearly that he rejected the notions presented by Donald Trump, even though those notions, those suggestions, favored Russia far more than Ukraine. Today, Vladimir Zelensky will meet with his European allies, and he is going to make every effort to make sure that Ukraine's position is strengthened. What are we getting from Donald Trump? There is a contradictory view. On the one hand, he blames Ukraine for the fact that there is a war at all. Then he gets upset with Vladimir Putin for not being willing to go along with his plan. Then, well, it goes on and on and on. It is contradiction after contradiction. And it is confusing. Let's be clear, to friend and foe. What is clear is that Donald Trump does not want to offend Vladimir Putin. He does not want to offend Russia. And so we are left with a real conundrum. What will the future of Ukraine be? And can Ukraine be compelled to give territory? Because that is what Vladimir Putin is demanding. Now, will the United States provide Ukraine with weaponry that it needs in order to defend itself? And the answer is, Donald Trump doesn't seem to be so inclined. What's the reason? Is it that he does not want a direct confrontation with Vladimir Putin? That may well be the issue. Because remember, and we've talked about this before, Russia is a nuclear power. And the last thing we want to see is the rattling of the nuclear saber. That is very clear. And this, my friends, is what it all boils down to. So there are issues domestic and foreign. But now let's turn to another matter. the question of what happened when United States forces, including the USS Gerald Ford, attacked boats in order to prevent or to interdict drugs coming to the United States. First of all, we know that the videotape is available. Donald Trump indicated he was willing to release that videotape, but now the administration seems to be hedging. We're not sure we're ever going to see it, so we may never know. But the question you have to ask is, was a war crime committed when on the second swing, two individuals who were on the boat and who were clinging to the boat for life were killed in an American action, an overwhelming action? Now, let's point out, first of all, that we don't know where that boat was going. Frankly, there are some who suggest it wasn't going to the United States. Number two, we don't know who gave the order. Was it Pete Hegseth, or was it Donald Trump, or was it an admiral who appears now to be the scapegoat? And more importantly, why is it that members of Congress who have top security clearance are not being allowed to see that videotape? How come? What's the reason? Is somebody trying to hide something? And that to me is the real question. When members of the United States Senate, who are cleared for the most active intelligence briefing, are told no, they cannot see this tape and it will not be released, that to me raises all kinds of red flags. What is Donald Trump trying to hide? Now, I ask this question because the question of Pete Hegseth's continuation as Secretary of Defense, not Secretary of War. They can say it over and over again, but it is Secretary of Defense. Will Pete Hegseth be able to maintain his position? And that, my friends, is a real question, a question of the hour. My own view is that Pete Hegseth never should have been appointed Secretary of Defense and never should have been confirmed by the Senate. But there is one other matter that I must address this morning. So much has been building up, and that has to do with the question of vaccines. As you know, because you've been following the news, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. dismissed that board which deals with vaccines. And all of you are aware that the board came to a new decision, a divided decision, but a decision nonetheless. The National Association of Pediatricians has attacked what this board, this panel, has done. There is no question that Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s views about vaccines are influencing what's happening. It is not the science. It is what Robert Kennedy Jr. does in terms of his appointments to various positions. The idea that vaccines are under attack is something which I find absolutely incredible. And every single scientist, physician, intelligent thinker who I've talked with agrees that what Bobby Kennedy Jr. is doing is affecting all of us in a negative way. For children, and for adults, the idea that vaccines are being deprecated by this administration. And let me remind you that one of the things which was discussed at Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s confirmation hearing was this matter, and he has violated the very essence of what he said. So, do you understand on every level in this administration, whether it's domestic policy, foreign policy, whether it is matters coming to the United States Supreme Court, we are all affected. Today, my friends, is December 8th. Yesterday was December 7th. Sunday, December 7th. We all remember what happened on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, even those of us who were not alive at the time. We remember Franklin Roosevelt's words that that day would be a day which would live in infamy. Let me tell you that I believe that a lot of what is happening today, well, it will live in infamy. But we pause now to remember what happened at Pearl Harbor and how all of our lives, those of us living and those not, were changed. Thank God the United States of America won World War II. And it is something to reflect on very quickly. William L. Shirer wrote a piece for Look magazine in December of 1961, in which he explained what would have happened if Hitler had won the war, how America would have been divided between Hitler and the Japanese, and the whole course of history would have changed. I always remember these dates because it seems to me they are important. So, the question as we conclude, are these days that we live in now days of infamy? Will we lose, well, a lot of what we believe we should have? At least some of us believe it. And the question boils down, ladies and gentlemen, to one man, Donald Trump. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. You can write a review on Apple Podcasts, drop a comment on YouTube or Spotify, and click any of the links in the show notes to connect with me on social media. Please do remember to share this episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which is, of course, our goal. Remember, this show has been getting so much positive attention that we're excited to bring on advertising support. You hear it at the beginning, you hear it at the end, and we hope that it will enhance the quality of this podcast and its ability to reach out. And of course, my deep appreciation to Gogo Zoger, the wonderful producer of this program, who makes sure we are up and running every single day. Thanks, Gogo. And to all of you, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you then.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.